one of the major questions we usually ask is, what's going to happen when you die? What happens to your business? What happens to your intellectual property? We have to talk about death all the time because when you're starting a business, the subject of death comes up because the only thing that will suffer will be the business. We need to plan for that now. Don't you want to talk about these things now?
But what should we do, should be thinking about? Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. And today I'm excited to have David. David is a lawyer who, David, you and I met through the Founders Institute as I am just starting to kick off my business and reached out to you because I need some legal documentation to set up for my C Corp. And speaking to you and wanting to understand, how does this whole death piece come into play when it setting up a business of our own?
Good question. So first of all, hey everyone, thanks for having me, Niki. Hello to the audience. I want to make something very clear. I am not a wills and trust lawyer, meaning I don't necessarily deal with the legal documentation that goes along with when somebody dies or is preparing for death. However, the type of attorney I am, which is a corporate and intellectual property attorney, we unfortunately have to talk about death all the time because when you're starting a business or when you have intellectual property, meaning you've created something that you want protection over, the subject of death comes up because most businesses have to prepare for what happens to their assets, including their intellectual property, if death should occur. So one of the major questions we usually ask is, what's going to happen when you die? What happens to your business? What happens to your intellectual property? We need to plan for that now. And so there are certain legal documentation that we need as corporate and intellectual properties attorneys, separate and apart from what you'll make or create with your wills and trust attorney. And that's kind of why I thought this would be a really good conversation. We talk about death more than we probably thought we would as corporate and IP attorneys.
And yet it's a super difficult topic. Now, when I reached out to you, David, I didn't know that you actually have a personal story and the loss of your father. And when I asked about this topic to talk about intellectual property and preparing for death, you said, as many podcasts have you done, this particular topic has not come across your desk.
No, I have not specifically spoken about this topic for an entire podcast, which I'm super excited about. But yes, death, I definitely believe that from a very young age, I've been put on this earth for the benefit of other people that have lost somebody at some point in their life. And what do I mean by that? I lost my grandparents pretty young. I mean, I was there in the room when my grandfather had a heart attack. I was like 14 years old. I did CPR on him. It was a traumatic night, but ended up kind of building up my strength. But I was like one of the only kids in class that lost their grandparents. Like I was always that person. Like, oh, David's the only one in school that lost his grandfather. Fast forward a few years later, and I lost my father young also. Again, it was part of a very small club of 22-year-olds that lost their parent, and so that became a outlet for me to provide the strength to others that would then lose some family member or just somebody close to them young. Years after that, about 15 years after that, I lost my sister.
Oh my goodness.
And that to leukemia. She was only 39 years old, and so that again was like another situation where like Kim, join that club of like, young adults that lost a sibling. I mean, nobody wants to know from this. Nobody should know from this, but death has somehow,
Part of life.
hovered around me. Yeah,
And if it,
exactly. Yeah. And I actually, the deaths that I've experienced, these family members, I've come to realize how special they were. I wasn't there for when my father passed away, but I was there for when my sister passed away, and that in of itself was like one of the most special and monumental moments of my life, that prepared me for you know really anything that I've been able to overcome since then. That has nothing to do with death. Like think like personal triumphs and job successes and stuff like that. Or rejection of some kind or whatever. It's prepared me to realize that life is way too short, and you just got to make the best of it.
it is. I mean, well, I feel that empowerment, right? I feel that every day with my parents behind me, is as sad as it is. And when I tell people my story about, my father was 42, my mother was 50. And every time I say that, there's this heartbreaking pause of
Oh,
like, oh, I'm so sorry. And yet there's a part of me that feels, as much as I had missed them, there's still a part of me that I feel like I have, wherever your belief is, but my belief is I have guardian angels looking over me and not being afraid and going for my dreams. And with that, I just want to take a pause here because you actually share a detailed story, a letter to your father through a TED Talk. So
yeah.
we're going to just take a pause and share that video here.
Awesome.
Well, David, what a powerful opportunity to share your story on stage. What inspired you to do it, and what was the message that you really wanted to get across to your audience?
Wow. Yeah, I do a lot of public speaking, but there was nothing like that TED Talk. It was a very cathartic experience. I worked with the TED producers and realized, wow, how uncanny that I had that I was living my father's life in reverse, and that my mission in life as a lawyer I finally realized, was to help entrepreneurs in protecting their business. And my father was like the quintessential entrepreneur that I was trying to help. And so it was a really amazing experience. It was a few years ago now, and I didn't realize how much of an impact it would have on my clients, who are mostly entrepreneurs and startups that are looking to protect their businesses. And so it sometimes acts as a segue, kind of as we're doing now, to kind of discuss death and what it means for your intellectual property, for your business. It happens. And so we have to prepare for it for sure. And so the message, I think, is that, like, let's talk about these issues. And by the way, it's not just about death. I mean, we talk about, like, usually when you're setting up a business, we talk about the 4Ds, as they're called. What happens if somebody dies? Of course. What happens if somebody is disabled? What does disability mean? That could be physically, that could be emotional, it could be voluntary, involuntary. But what happens to your founders, to your co-founders, to your consultants? What happens? Like, what do you do? There are mechanisms that have to be implemented now to prevent those situations. Divorce. What happens if one of your founders gets divorced, or you get divorced? And then the last one, a big one, is what happens if the company is going to dissolve, dissolution. And so those are the 4 situations that we have to talk about. And death is always the most interesting one, because nobody wants to prepare for their death. I mean, that's precisely the
Or
issue,
even
right? At
talk
the end of
about
the
it.
day,
I
we even
mean,
talk about it,
just
right?
just to have
Yes,
that conversation. I know we both come from the Jewish tribe, and that
yes,
expression, the kinahur, don't get yourself a kinahur, right? Don't get, and
yes,
several cultures are very much like that, where if you
very
talk
much.
about it, then somewhere you believe that you're invoking, for it to actually happen. But by not talking about it, then when it does happen, then there's that risk. So
Yeah.
as a lawyer, how do you navigate that conversation?
It's really good. I often tell a story. Before I joined the firm that I'm at now, which is a very small firm, kind of dedicated to entrepreneurs and startups. Before that, I was at a company called Cantor Fitzgerald. For those of you who don't know, Cantor Fitzgerald was the company that lost 675 people during the World Trade Center on 9/11. And I joined them probably about a year after that. And so I was now coming into a company where everybody they're dead. They were decimated.
Oh,
And here I was joining their innovation division. I was joining as a corporate and intellectual property attorney. And I realized, wow, the things that can go wrong with business and intellectual property when somebody dies. As an example, we had most of the employees that worked for Cantor Fitzgerald that died on 9/11 were inventors of patent applications that were owned by the company. But there was never any documentation that transferred the ownership from the inventor employee to the company.
oh my goodness.
And so now here I was, my first project was like, we got to button this up. We have to reach out to the spouses, these poor spouses of the company, because under intestacy laws, a lot of these people died without wills, without the preparation that they probably should have taken. And now that meant that under laws of a particular state, if there's no will, it goes to your surviving spouse. If there's a will, then you can get to say where it goes to. And so we had to go to these surviving spouses
After this
and say,
devastating.
correct, and say, hey, by the way, your husband or your wife was an employee of the company. They never signed anything about their patent application, but the company owns it. Like, there were very. I remember 2 or 3 families that were just, not playing ball, as we should say. I mean, but at the end of the day, they ended up assigning their rights. It is what it is. The company owns it. But I often use that as a story to tell entrepreneurs, I know it's hard to talk about. I know you think it's a jinx. I get it, right? But let's deal with it now. What will happen to the company in the event of your death? Let's say it now. Let's talk about it now, because the problems that we will have will be triple if you don't think about it now, right? The company will suffer. The technology will suffer. The invention will suffer. The goals you're trying to solve, or the solutions you're trying to provide to people, that will suffer. So what's worse, So yeah, in the end, everybody ends up talking about it. But I often bring up that story to let them know that without the proper preparation, without the proper conversations, it's a world of problems we just don't want to get into. So better talk about it now.
And the 4
Yeah.
Ds. I mean, to
Yeah.
go through each of those, I did have an episode on death and divorce. And we
Yes.
talked about how divorce is a death. It's the death of the
Oh, yeah.
marriage, the dissolution or the dissolvement of a business, right? Especially, it ends up being your baby. And then at any time you have to make that decision to close the business, there's that bereaving process as well. So it's fascinating that you came up with those Ds that we need to talk about before the finalization of whether it's a C Corp or an LLC, whatever the business structure is.
Correct.
People are resistant, though. Is it just they can't see outside or come up with the different scenarios? And maybe you can kind of walk us through how people can step into this. I can't tell you, let me take a step back. When I introduce Endeavo and the concept of building a final playbook, and I talk to these business owners who have very viable businesses, most of them are online, and I say to them, hey, if something happened to you and you die tomorrow, not just your phone and multi-factor authentication, they're like a deer in the headlights.
Totally. Nobody wants to think about it.
For
Nobody thinks about it.
all the years and money that they have put into their current business model, they do not have a plan in place if something were to happen, death, dying, or incapacitation.
No, it is definitely a cultural thing. I agree. When I bring it up, because we have like a checklist and it's there, it's like right there in writing on a checklist. Like, we need to talk about these things. These are assets that we really have to protect. Your business, your name, whatever it is.
No,
I don't I usually get the reaction of, but why? And so I kind of explain why. And then, if like, as an example, fear is a big thing with lawyers, right? If you can, like, sometimes fear is the best teacher. And so, I almost have to play out the scenarios. Well, you're married, and so, like, your wife has her own job. You are a founder of a company, and you have a co-founder, and God forbid you die or divorce. It is completely possible. It is complete under the laws, under divorce laws, under intestacy laws, that your founder is now going to be in business with your ex-wife or your wife. And so let's talk about that. Let's play that out. Do you see them together? Like, do you see them, like, hanging out and, like, coming to the office? Like, do you think your wife even wants to deal with it? Do you think your co-founder wants to deal with it? You almost have to create those artificial, hypotheticals of, like, what can really happen, to hopefully, I hate to say it, to hopefully instill some fear of, like, oh my God, I don't want my wife to be my co-founder's new partner, type of thing. And
Right.
so you have to play out the scenario in order to get the response.
Well, just to share a real life scenario, and this is back in the
Please.
70s, where my father was in business with his brother, my uncle. And when my father was going through his 18 months of cancer treatment, the only thing they really put into place was they did have a life insurance policy, which they had put into place like in the conception of the company. But as my father's going through the cancer treatment and then coming towards the end of his life, there was no conversation about that, what that was like. So as a result, at 42 years old, my father passes away and my uncle takes on the business. But the way like my mother still had to be involved, even knowing it was so messy. It was not good for our family. It does create a lot of family conflicts, especially, whether the co-founder is a family member but even the way, I think it was that the business became my uncle's, but the property that the business was on was still ownership of my mother. And like I said, it took until my mother's death 10 years later for it to resolve. So those are the nuances that people just don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to, I don't want fear to be why someone makes a decision, but sometimes you just have to slap someone in the face with it, like, to be like, this is what can, you have to shake them and be like, this is what can happen. I've been involved in so many situations. I'll give you another kind of example. When you file, let's say you file a patent, it's filed in the names of inventors. Let's say you and your co-founder file a patent on your technology, and either of you didn't. We're not. We can talk about. It could be any scenario, but either of you didn't take the next step that we would recommend in terms of planning, which is assign your rights, kind of like the whole Cantor Fitzgerald thing. Assign your rights to your company, and now all of a sudden, your co-founder, again, either dies or goes missing or doesn't want to be involved. I don't want to be involved anymore. Leave me alone. I'm not answering your phone call. And that's a death too at the end of the day, right? Like the non-participation of somebody in a company or an invention where you're almost you don't know what to do. Why? Because likely your company was set up, or your day-to-day operations was set up that required this person to weigh in on certain decisions. And so when there's if, like, all decisions have to be unanimous, and now this co-founder is nowhere to be found, or you need to make a decision on the patent, and the patent's still owned by the two inventors, and now one of them doesn't want to participate, and the solo inventor is left to make a decision that he can't legally make, because under patent law both inventors have equal rights to what they own until they assign it to a company. It's a disaster. I have seen such great technology and ideas like
Lost.
suffer, lost because they never got themselves organized. Oh, I knew him for years. I went to church with him. I went to
Nope.
shul with him. He's been my best friend. He's been great. Like we knew it. I don't care. I often say I don't care. I don't care how awesome of a relationship you have. I don't care if they're a stranger. I don't care if you know them from birth. We need to organize ourselves in case these situations happen, because the only thing that will suffer will be the business, will be the technology. That's like the moral of the day, right? You need to organize yourself and think about these situations. Not hard. And by the way, don't you want to talk about like in my estimation, I'd rather talk about these things now when everything is puppy dogs and rainbows, when you're not dying, when we have a happy
We're
marriage,
not going
right?
through a
When we are
diagnosis. We're not, I mean,
exactly like you like this is the time to talk about it. Could you imagine having to talk about these things when you're undergoing
under
some
distress.
sort of stride? Yeah, who precisely do it now as early as possible, even if it's difficult, because it will be a whole lot difficult later, you know?
And part of what we do here at Death and Dying Digital Age podcast is really trying to empower people to break through, whether it's procrastination or fear or overwhelm, or even just to step into. And I have to say that this legal piece is one of those top 10 reasons why people don't talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody's so caught up with I don't you said you hit the nail on the head before. I don't want to make a will because it's like, an omen for what's to come. The whole vernacular and dialogue needs to be flipped. And sometimes if you're part of a if you've been in part of a business relationship, then you can maybe understand, wow, I got to get my personal stuff in line also. And by the way, this is not terribly expensive to do, like to do the legal documentation that we would require to organize yourself so that your business isn't suffering after death or your intellectual property isn't suffering after death is not expensive. It's not hard to do. It just needs to be done, because without it, it's it's a it's a gray area for sure.
So let's, talk about some of those steps and we're focused on people like me, new
Yeah.
founders, or whether you're starting an LLC or a C Corp, because you're looking for funding. But what should we do, should be thinking about? So one of the things I know as a founder, it's like, I have to get my either LLC or C Corp documentation done. Is that the time where I'm sitting down, and then is it a plan that I need to put in place, or is there actual language that needs to be put into these uh, vestor partnership agreements?
Yeah, good question. So the organizational documents of any sort of entity, well, whether it's an LLC, which is which the organizational document is an operating agreement, or it's the organizational document for a C corp, which would be the bylaws or the shareholders agreement, usually should anticipate these types of situations. And so if you're hopefully working with an attorney that kind of walking you through some of the 4D situations that we talked about, and there might be other kind of situations that are not necessarily related to death that are just as important. Like, what if, like for instance, if your business involves like a physical brick and mortar store, what if, God forbid, the store burns down or something like that? That's the death of the store. And so what do you do about that? That should be in your lease. And so that you should have some sort of clause that kind of mentions that. Insurance is a big thing to kind of, to help out in that situation. But it's the organizational document, to answer your question, that I think is the most important and earliest time to think about this, where a lawyer can press the founder and or founders as to what should be done and how it should be memorialized in such agreements. What happens if? That's the question to answer. And again, it can get kind of complicated. You can have multiple founders that have multiple views on this. For instance, I've been involved in situations where there's been four founders, and each of them thought a little bit something different about death. In the event of death, I wanted to go to my mother.
Good.
Okay. And so, okay, so now mom is the partner. In the event of death, I'm okay with you, the rest of you, taking over my position or equity or shares or whatever it is. So for those that are comfortable speaking about it, it then becomes this, almost negotiation as to, and I love that. That's the way it should be.
Right.
All founders should have an equal say as to what should happen. Um, but keep in mind that whatever we put in these agreements will then be viewed by investors, and so you don't want like cockamamie crazy clauses about death. Oh yeah, in the event of death, it's going to my favorite charity that loves penguins. Like, I'm not so sure that's the way
Make
to
good
go.
business decisions, right? I mean, here's the
Yeah,
challenge that people really need to come to terms with: is it as a business owner or entrepreneur, we are spending a tremendous amount of our waking days, hours, thinking about what is the impact we want to make on industry.
yeah,
And I think that we need to at least spend a piece of that time thinking about, if I'm not here, what is that legacy that I want to leave behind for all that I've just built?
yeah.
And I think that that's a new way of thinking that most entrepreneurs, we're just so laser focused on. I just got to get my product out. I have, timelines and investor schedules to meet. And yet, if we just spend that moment to say, I've got that backup plan. So things that we should be thinking about. One, where are you with, insurance, life insurance as part of
Yeah, that's
that preparation package?
Yeah, so we don't get involved in that. We work with insurance agents that we usually refer our founders to. There's all sorts of insurance that you can buy: errors and emissions, liability, intellectual property, life insurance, as you said. So that we usually work with agents that are kind of like, entrepreneurial friendly, that just get the startup world. Um, it's hard for a startup to think about insurance, let's say, when they're already thinking about the cost of getting their business up and running, hiring someone like me to create the legal documentation we're talking about. And now you throw insurance into it. As much as I think it's a really necessary part to the process, it may not be, what they're thinking of. It may be too much on the pile at that point. Definitely the organizational documents of a corporation. Definitely something called what we call a buy and sell agreement, which is it, if you're a married founder and you don't want your husband or surviving spouse, your I should say, if you're a married founder and you don't want your surviving spouse, to be part of your organization, that's something that the spouse has to sign now, right? So it's not just, about having a will or trust or something like that. So those types of agreements are called buy and sell agreements, and so where the spouse is literally going on the record now so that it won't be disputed later in the event that my husband or wife dies and they are a founder of a company. I'm having nothing to do with it. That's a very popular type of agreement as well, at these early stages as well.
Let me ask.
Yeah, sure,
So, just because I'm thinking of my situation, so
sure.
I'm sure that if I pass away, that my husband doesn't have the capacity or interest to do the day to day operations that I'm handling right now. But because I do own a significant equity within the business, is there a way that I could structure the documentation to say, okay, husband of mine, Chuck, you are not going to be part of that executive board, but my
But
estate still owns, right?
yes, 100%.
Okay,
100%. You can be very creative with all of this. That's why, again, really good to discuss up front,
right.
where yes, you can totally say that my husband will not make any decisions, but he will financially benefit from what I built. 100%.
Okay.
That is completely plausible. I love those types of creative scenarios. You can even say things like, my husband's not taking it, but my sister is, something like that. There's all sorts of things you can do. Again, you want your co-founders to kind of agree with all of this. And then also, just from the intellectual property perspective, just make sure that anything that any of your employees, consultants, freelancers, you're probably going to do this anyway, but you just never know. any sort of intellectual property, patents, trademarks, or copyrights that people are creating for you that are to be owned by the company, that the proper documentation, as soon as they create it, says that, thank you for being a consultant of mine. Thank you for creating what you created. Thank you for being an employee of mine. Thank you for what you created. Thank you for being X for me. Thank you for what you created. But here is a document, a work made for hire, a consultant agreement, an employment agreement, a vested equity agreement, anything that just says, thank you for your service, but everything you're creating is owned by the company, right? That's really important, because to get those it's so hard to get those documents later when those people don't exist anymore. And so, or one of the parties doesn't exist anymore, and then it becomes a mess. Again, not terribly expensive to do these things. It's kind of like, buy one, use it always type of thing. More just introduce these conversations as early as possible. I feel like that's like, I don't know. I feel like that should be the motto with death. I'm maybe I'm in the.
Endeavor, we talk about peace of mind for those you leave behind, right? It's true.
Yeah. I think I want to believe that I want to believe that we're not the minority, but I feel very comfortable talking about death, and the sooner that you can bring it up in life, forget business now, the sooner you can bring it up in life, the better, in the long run, I think that's better. Yeah.
And with that, David, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing best practices and really breaking through this conversation in order to prepare our legacy and to leave that peace of mind for those we leave behind. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and we'll end here. Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.